Hi, my name is Alex Cordner, and I am in Professor George Stewart's 2010 April Principles of Physics class. And today I'll be doing a podcast on what, in my opinion, are the three most important principles of physics used to break a board. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain to you in depth what those three principles of physics are that I will be using to break a board. And then I will, at the end, show you basically those principles in action when I break a board. So thank you very much for watching, and hope you enjoy. Warning: the following podcast features stunts performed either by professionals or under the supervision of professionals. Accordingly, Alex Cordner and the physics department, mainly Professor George Stewart, must insist that no one attempt to recreate or reenact any stunt or activity performed on this podcast. Today we're going to be breaking some boards using some simple physics that we've all learned this month. It's a pretty simple thing to do if you know what you're doing. This is a simple pine board. It's about a foot long by a foot wide. It's about an inch thick. And we're going to be applying some basic physics that I'm going to show you that are used to break a board. The first basic principle of physics that we're going to use in order to break this board is called force. And the force in this case is going to be my fist being applied downward onto this board. Now, as you can see right now, I'm applying force down on this board and it's not breaking. The reason for that is because of Newton's third law, which states that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So basically, what that means is when I'm swinging my fist down like this, and I'm applying force downward on this, which is going down into the board is exerting the exact same amount of force up. And basically, we're getting a net force of 0. Now, in order for me to break this board right here, I have to apply more force going downward on this board, and this board is able to exert back up. And when we do that, the board's going to break. The second basic principle of physics used in order to break this board today is called momentum. Now, momentum is equal to mass times velocity. Now, the mass in this case is going to be my fist, which is going to stay constant throughout this entire podcast. So the only thing that we really have to work with is the velocity, or the speed of my swing. And as you can see right there, I was applying a very low velocity, or a very low speed, which isn't going to produce as great of a momentum as if I were applying a much higher velocity or a greater speed. Now you can see, if I apply a much greater speed or a much greater velocity, the greater my momentum is going to be. And basically, the greater that your momentum is in your swing, the more force that you're going to be able to exert down on the board, which is going to make it a lot easier to break this board. The third and final principle of physics that we're going to be using in this podcast today to break this board is known as pressure. Now, pressure is equal to the amount of force divided by the area. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of surface area on here, and there's a little bit of surface area compared to that board on my fist, especially the bottom where I'm going to be striking. This is a very small surface area. Now, the smaller that the surface area gets, the greater the pressure that I can apply on this board. Now, in the same token, if I had an open palm like I do now, and I were to strike this board, my surface area is much greater, which is going to give me less pressure on the board. So in order to break this board with my open hand like this, I'd have to apply more force. But if I'm applying my fist down like this, I have a very small surface area, so I need to apply less force in order to break the board. So this is going to be the closed fist. Now for the open palm. What you just saw in the last two clips were the three basic principles of physics I used in order to break this board, which were force, momentum, and pressure. The force was when I was striking down on the top of this board, I was exerting force down on the top of this board. Now, because of Newton's third law, which states that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, when I was exerting force downward on this board, the board was exerting the exact same amount of force back up, which was giving us a net force of 0. So I had to use the second and third basic principles of physics that I stated in this podcast, which were momentum and pressure, in order to break this board. Now, as we know, the momentum was equal to the mass times the velocity. And the mass in this case was my fist, which stayed the exact same. So I had to increase the velocity, or increase the speed in which I struck down on this board with my swing, in order to give us a greater momentum. And the greater that the momentum was, the easier it was to break this board because I was exerting more force. So when I was swinging around like this really fast and striking the top of this board, my velocity was very high, which gave us a very good momentum, which made it easier to break the top of this board because we were exerting more force. Now, the final part that we used in order to break this board was the pressure. And as we know, the pressure is equal to the force divided by the area. Now, when my hand was spread out like this, we had to apply a much greater force in order to break this board. But when the surface area of my hand was much smaller, we had to apply less force because the surface area was much smaller, so less force was required to be applied down. But all three principles in action were the momentum, which was swinging down, the force when I struck the board, and the pressure, or the area in which I struck down on the board, were all three principles that caused this board to break. And with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this little podcast that I demonstrated on how to break a board and the three basic principles that I used in order to break it. Thank you very much and hope you enjoyed.